Well, Alexis, I am glad that you could join me today and get to share some great things with the community regarding data management and infrastructure. So, do you want to kind of give just a quick introduction of yourself and the topic?
Sure. Well, I'm Alexis Perumal, and let's see. My background is in computer science, and I started my career as a software developer at HP in San Diego. Worked in digital imaging and got involved in digital photography and the whole transition into color in the office, going from analog photography, silver halide, into digital imaging, and worked in that space for a long time. And then really from the standpoint of software development, although I also at different points in my career got involved in managing other engineering disciplines like EE and mechanical engineering. And then I made a transition in my career to the life sciences, to Illumina, which is the world leader in DNA sequencing technology. And Illumina was very interested in my background in large-scale software development as the company was growing, and got involved in a lot of different things at Illumina, dealing with large big data sets of DNA sequencing data. And then I left Illumina actually in the middle of COVID and went to an Illumina spinoff called Grail, which works in the cancer detection space, and was actually asked to come in as Grail was growing, and was asked to build out the IT organization at Grail. And so I had a chance to do that, and I've been at Grail ever since, approaching 5 years at Grail. A lot has changed at Grail over that time period. There's been a lot of growth, and then also some challenges as well. And then my role has also evolved at Grail, and I'm now involved leading the DevOps, site reliability, and build engineering organization as well within our software development organization.
That's really cool. That is I mean, there's quite the evolution and diversity of experience. And even just, I was thinking about, as you're talking about like introducing color and going from analog to digital in photography. And I was like, well, as we're going to jump into the topic of data, I was like, what we mean when we say data over the span of your career has changed a lot. Like what
That's
that
right.
looks like, and what does it manage, and the complexity and the layers and the abstraction and all of it. It's really interesting to think about. So I'm excited to kind of dive in. But yeah, if we're talking about data management infrastructure, give us kind of just what are we talking about there? Give maybe just a brief intro to that topic as it relates to entrepreneurs and founders.
Sure. Well, I guess the first thing I would say is there's a lot of different types of data, right? You have obviously your customer data that you probably care a lot about, right? Because I would think most entrepreneurs are very customer market focused. There's also internal data on your internal organization, your business operations. Of course, any entrepreneur is going to be focused on financial data, right? Because that's measuring how the business is doing. You could also think of, in terms of like your goals and OKRs, you're going to have what they call KPIs, key performance indicators, and those are varied, but those will be typically quantitative metrics that you use to measure how well you're doing against your goals. So I would say first you should think about the different types of data you have. And then to your point, where does that data come from? Where does it go? How do you use it? And gosh, there's so much to think about there. So first, I would say, starting with the externally focused, I think you need to be very intentional about what is your contract with your customers and what are the expectations. Data can be very sensitive, and so before I would say like one of the very first things you should do in defining your data strategy is to think about what is that agreement that you have with your customers? What is that compact with them? And how do you respect and honor that? For example, at Grail, we're dealing with cancer detection. We've developed a test called Gallery that can detect early stage cancer from a blood test. And one of the scenarios, that we've talked about is, in politics, presidential politics, they talk about an October surprise just before the election. And you could imagine, if the main candidate, if there was data leaked about prevalence of, that they may actually have cancer, or maybe that they don't have cancer, right? Either way. So information about your health is very sensitive. So I would start by understanding what are those boundaries. And I think there is a tension there because the data can be very powerful and it can be very lucrative to you, right? You have the opportunity to gather analytics on what people are doing. There are opportunities to monetize that yourself. There are also opportunities for you to sell that data to data aggregators that is lucrative to you. And so I would say there's going to be a tension there, and you need to figure that out. And then it depends on the industry, right? Fintech or life sciences, the data is critical to the health of the business. Within the life sciences, of course, in the US, you have HIPAA, you have a lot of regulations around how you manage that data, and you need to be aware of that. GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California, and a lot of states are following that pattern. So you should be aware of those expectations, those requirements, and you should be respecting those. Even, I know the focus today is not cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a hot topic, but even from the standpoint of cybersecurity, the way I would describe it is that the inner sanctum of what people are trying to get is the data, right? That's what the bad actors are trying to get, is the data. So all of these things about getting access to systems or passwords and authentication or spoofing user accounts, those are actually a means to an end. Those are vectors that they're using to get to the data so that they can get the data themselves and maybe even take it away from you. And so it's maybe a little bit of an oversimplification, but you can almost think of your cybersecurity strategy as what do you need to do to protect your data fundamentally, and then everything layers on top of that. So I would say those are constraints you need to think about, and then from there to consider, like you were saying, like where does this data go? How is it stored? How long is it stored there? What is the data that you're collecting? Even how does your data move? And how does your data move across systems? And how do you ensure it's secure both at rest and in motion? Typically, another thing I would say is that typically, like if I think early in my career, we would be trying to solve a problem, and we would want to get a system to solve a problem. And pretty quickly, we began to realize that the magic is not what the system can do and what you can do in the system. The magic is how the systems stitch together, which actually gets to things like middleware, right? And how the data flows across systems. And then I would also say, analogous to that, the power is not just your data. The power is how does your data connect to other data and stitching that together. So I've said a lot. Maybe I'll stop there, and then we can go in whatever direction you're interested in.
It's good. It's like there's so many paths in there. But I love that you started there for us with like just the kind of the responsibility of stewardship over that data, of both what do I collect, how does it get used, how does it get protected, but then also then there's in a sense the stewardship of how does it get leveraged for good, how does it get used effectively, stored effectively, all of those things. So I really like that in both senses, I really hear you framing it as a stewardship of that data. Because I mean, especially like you're talking about in your spaces, in some of the life sciences, but really in probably most businesses, what we're storing is data about people. And,
Right.
because at the end of the day, whether you're B2B, B2C, whatever, there's some level of human to human, and there's a lot of human related data in there. And so we really do want to steward that well. So, well, let's kind of take that though, and then walk through some of these different stages of growth in our framework. So we'll start with the existential stage, and the existential stage, it is really, really early. It's when you're just kind of defining, like, who am I serving? What problem am I solving? Why do I want to solve that? And so the graduation from there is a solution statement where you've kind of figured out, who am I helping? How am I helping them? How is it better than the other options? And you're kind of framing that together. But it's very much, what is this business that I may create? So even at that early stage, though, what kind of questions should a founder, an entrepreneur, a business owner be asking about their data?
Good question. So as I think about that, right, at that stage, I think, what is it? Seek first to understand, right? And so what is it you're trying to understand, or who is it you're trying to understand? I think often a founder may be focused on a particular target market. Maybe you're trying to focus on restaurants of a certain size within the city of San Diego. Maybe restaurants of a certain size within the city of San Diego that serve Mexican food. Then I guess just basic marketing, the questions I would ask is, like, what are the challenges of those businesses? What's hard? What are the problems that they're having? What can you help them with? You can think about it conceptually as a thought exercise. You can do interviews with them, but then you can also start looking at the data as well. And if I just think of life, right? So often we maybe have certain ways of doing things, or maybe we're trying to lose weight, as an example. Well, what do you do if you want to lose weight? Well, you're probably going to start exercising, maybe get up in the morning, go running. You're maybe going to modify your eating, maybe eat a little better, maybe eat a little bit less. And then you do that, and then maybe over time you notice maybe your jeans feel a little looser. Maybe you start sensing some results. Maybe some people give you compliments, and you go, okay, I'm losing weight. That's one approach. But I would also say the data-driven approach says the first thing you should do before you do any of that is get a scale and weigh yourself and get a baseline, and start weighing yourself at a certain frequency in a way that's repeatable. And then you can track your progress. Your jeans might be getting looser because they haven't gone through the dryer lately. And maybe you're losing weight, but you don't know how much. It may be you are losing weight, but maybe not as much as you think you are. And so I think one of the modern changes is to actually quantify these things, to really understand them. So I would say that, and quantification is not always easy, but it is also easier than it ever has been, as there's been a huge effort in the world to digitize information and to quantify it. And so I would say, I think at that existential stage, you're trying to understand the market, understand potential customer, and then the extent to which you're able to get data on that, or even potentially to collect your own data, right? To gather, to instrument maybe your application or your mobile app or something, to start gathering data on that, and then to look for insights from that data. And the insights you're looking for, I think, are not so much about your product or your application. The insights I think you're looking for are what is really behind how those target or potential customers behave, what's important to them, what they care about.
No, that's really good. I like, yeah, how you're describing. Yeah, there's some data around the market that can be extracted, but can also be observed, and the encouragement to get that baseline. Because I could imagine a lot of times people in that early stage, they're not thinking about recording or even like, hey, what metrics am I going to want to keep over time? But just, yeah, start getting, okay, where do we begin? You know, that's a really good encouragement there.
One quick thing I'll add too is, as you're able to gather this data, I think you'll find that, right, investors, you know, the financial sector is typically very quantitative,
right?
And so they will gravitate toward wanting metrics and data. And I think this kind of information, being able to present it not just intuitively, but also to be able to present it quantitatively, will make it easier to build a case for fundraising.
Totally. Yeah, it definitely builds that level of authority. You know, okay, if I'm going to invest in you, I've got to trust you, and I got to, okay, or you got the drive to go through with this, but you also have the ability to go through it. Well, if you've done your homework and validated your assumptions through data, I'm already beginning to trust your ability to get to the finish line here. So no, that's a really good call out there, Alexis. I like that. I did get distracted there for a minute when you were talking about gathering data from Mexican food restaurants in San Diego, and I was like, I could get some qualitative data. That'd be a fun exercise. But then you start talking about losing weight, which felt in conflict with that. So, you know, but I was tracking through there. It was good. No, but I love those examples. It is really helpful to kind of go, okay, yeah, I can imagine that, and now I can track that back to starting a business, and there was really good.
And I would also say too that when you gather the data, like maybe 80% of the time it's aligned with your intuition, but maybe 20% of the time it isn't. And I'm making those numbers, by the way, but there are times when the data surprises you. And to me, that's the real value, right?
Yeah, when you go, wait, that's not what I thought, what's going on here? And it leads to further questions and investigation and discovery there. So no, it's really good. As we kind of wrap up here, a couple of just more fun questions in here. What is Alexis, what's a favorite AI tool that you got?
Well, I think the best AI tool is your brain.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, that's a new answer. I have not gotten that one from anyone. I like it there.
Yeah, I think it's and to think critically about these things. And I mean, honestly, I've just been using Gemini and integrating it into my life. I have enterprise chat GPT at work, and I have Gemini personally, and so I go back and forth between the two of them, and it's interesting to compare them. Honestly, I'm using Gemini in many ways as a substitute for Google search in many ways. And that's where I think Gemini actually does a little bit better than ChatGPT is with maybe more recent data. But to me, what's happening with LLMs right now is amazing because, well, I guess the way I would describe it is just taking a step back. You know, I think of atoms and bits, right? Okay. And so if you think of the traditional economy, it's dealing with atoms. You know, General Motors builds a car, right? You have products. You go to Costco, you buy stuff, right? These are atoms, right? And then the digital economy is about bits, right? Google, Netflix, right? These are all about bits. And in computer science, software is all about bits. Software is much harder to deal with atoms. It's easy to deal with bits. In large volumes of bits we can deal with. And so there's been a lot of work over the past few decades, right, to digitize everything. Why? Because it's like this high-speed superhighway. If you can digitize the information, we can process it and we can do things with it incredibly fast. If you're dealing with atoms, it's hard.
So the constraints are more readily apparent.
Everything is orders of magnitude slower, right? And you know, like for example, you know, in the backyard, you want to play soccer, you need a soccer ball, right? If I want to make 100 soccer balls, Is it easy to do that in software with, a digital soccer ball? Like if I can build one soccer ball in software, then I can create a for loop and I can make 100,
Many as we want. Yeah.
100 million. It's easy.
Yeah.
If you want to make 100 million soccer balls, you're going to make factories all over Pakistan, right? To do that, right? So there's been a lot of work to digitize the world, and even like actually, like, I live in San Francisco with Waymo, right? Huge amount of effort.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you want to make a car drive in a computer game, easy. You want to make a car drive in physical city streets, that's hard.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the atoms, right? And this is the intersection of the atoms and the bits. And so Google is very powerful in this world of bits, much harder in the world of atoms. So all this work then goes into driverless cars, trying to figure out how you can apply the world of bits to the world of atoms, because if you can figure that out, then you have huge efficiencies, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess the way I would think about it is computers from the very beginning deal with numbers. They can do math, they can do computation, and they can do it much faster than humans. And we've seen, decades of development. But language has been much harder, right? And but then what we see now with LLMs is you're able to vectorize language, and you're able now to bring language. I talked about atoms and bits. Now you're able to bring language into the realm of math.
Yeah, which is wild.
And math is something that computers know how to do really well. So it's an exciting time, and I think where this goes is not clear, right? I mean, there's a lot of speculation, but I think it is very profound, and what this looks like only time will tell. But I think it also creates a lot of opportunity.
No, I think it definitely does. Yeah, it's a little bit exciting to see. Yeah, it's exciting, and then sometimes scary, where it's like, this feels like one of those, dystopian movies that I watched recently. When you see some things. But what we talked about a little bit, yeah, AI.
And actually, let me make one other comment too, if I may, and that is that, like, I think of it as like AI fundamentally. Like, what is AI? Because I remember, like, decades ago when I was studying computer science, we had AI, and I took AI classes, and it was an interesting curiosity, but it wasn't dramatic. It's now becoming dramatic. It's becoming dramatic, right? And what changed? Why is it dramatic? Like, what changed between then and now? I would say, well, it's so you have, I think, three elements that go into it, right? One is the data. Second is the compute.
Yeah, just the power of it.
And third are the algorithms, right? So what's happened with data? If I compared to like where we were decades ago, well, there's a lot more of it, right? And this is what we were just saying, how everything is getting digitized, right? So I go do a workout, right? I have my heart rate monitor. I have all this digital data that's streaming into the cloud with my health, right? So a lot of health data, just as an example, right? Your house, right? You have temperature data. You can have temperature data from different parts of the house. You can have it all the time, right? I talked about the COVID data that we were able to get in real time during COVID. At least daily case counts from every county in the United States or every country, right? So you have this explosion in data. What has happened with compute? Well, it's Moore's law. Compute has gotten much more powerful, right? By orders of magnitude, both with CPUs and GPUs. And so, and then what has happened with algorithms? Well, there have been breakthroughs in algorithms, particularly with LLMs. And some of it is enabled by these other things. One of the things that's interesting with LLMs is that they realize that, often in life, you hit diminishing returns to scale, right? Where you do something, you see benefit. You do more of it, you see benefit. You see rapid benefit. But then if you keep going, you hit diminishing returns. But what they found with LLMs is that as your model size hits certain sizes, you hit a knee in the curve, where all of a sudden, instead of just garbage, it actually makes sense. It's actually doing something coherent, right? And so, and it's hitting these knees at points that the amount of data and the compute power that we had 10 years ago was not sufficient. And then these algorithms now are taking advantage of that, right?
Right. Yeah. You get that critical mass in there.
Get that critical mass. And so I think that's where we are. And again, where that goes, I think we'll have to see. There's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of threat, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of excitement, and all of that is appropriate. But in some ways, though, I think it's following historical patterns. And I'm a big fan of history. And if you look at new innovations, the Industrial Revolution, computing itself, right, as these innovations came online and the impact they had on society and the concerns that people had with it at the time. Like I remember, I remember when I was in 8th grade, we would open up the math textbook and they would have us go to the appendix, and they would have tables in the appendix for things like logarithms or sine functions, or even, I don't know if they had square roots, but they would have these tables in there.
And then your calculator didn't do it.
Well, they would teach us how to interpolate. Now, we had calculators when I was in junior high, but
like graphing, could they do those, like the logarithmic stuff, or anyway?
Yeah, I mean they could do those functions, but the tables were still in the textbooks because the textbooks were from like 10 years ago.
Right.
And,
Okay.
And it was still in the curriculum a little bit because the curriculum was from like maybe 5 years ago or something like that. So every once in a while they would say, okay, well, this is how we would do it, and you would interpolate between these values, right? But you don't have to worry about that. Just hit the button on the calculator. Right. There was this idea that, well, calculators are going to destroy education because nobody's going to learn any math because the calculator will do it for you. So these kids are going to be stupid, right? Well, they're not stupid, right? And then you could say the same thing about Excel and these tools that came on, right? So a lot of this, so I'm curious to see how it develops, but like this idea that LLMs are going to destroy education because nobody will ever know how to write because they have LLMs, right? Well, the reality is in the new world, we're going to have these tools at our disposal, and we will still be expected to add value. We will still be expected to contribute. But you'll have this tool in your toolbox, just like today you have a calculator available to you. But that doesn't mean you don't take math class. But it means you calculate a cosine a whole lot faster.
Yeah, I don't need a pencil and
right.
Figured it out. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, Alexis, because we homeschool our kids. We have 3 teenagers right now, and we were actually having this conversation over the last few years because growing up, and being in school in the 80s and 90s, and it's like okay, graphing calculators all kind of coming on the scene, and I remember that conversation of like, oh, are you cheating by using these things? And it's like, no, that actually helped me when I also studied computer science in college. So it's like, I couldn't have I can't imagine taking those math classes without some of those tools. It would have been a lot slower. But then, recognizing that same thing with our kids, where it's like, okay, I don't want to keep them from this. I still need them, like you say, they need to learn to write and communicate. But I'd rather them learn to be really good with these tools and, like you're saying, add value. And it's a continually changing space. And it's like, it's easy to be afraid of it, but it's also like, okay, how do I responsibly embrace it? But also recognize like, okay, there's some good things of like, okay, what do I not want it to become a crutch where they don't develop maybe some of those necessary competencies? So.
In the old days in 3rd grade, they would teach people cursive.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to, and cursive is better than printing because I guess you don't have to raise the pencil as much, so you can do it a little quicker and blah, blah, blah. People need to be able to write letters because you need to be able to write letters because you'll spend your whole life writing letters. Well, nobody uses cursive, right? And because all of your communicating is really with your thumbs and Instagram. So we're
gonna have thumbing classes for our kids.
Exactly.
They don't need any classes. They figure that out pretty fast.
Exactly. So I think the point is getting back to the data. The point is that it's the data that underlines all this, right? And so maybe if you think of data analytics, like traditional data analytics, it's it's a little bit like going from a calculator to a computer, right? It's a more fundamental stage, right? But I mean, that's actually the building blocks that AI is built on top of. And then I would also say for a company, like in many cases, you may not be aware of it, but it could be that when you go out in the future, that one of the most valuable assets your company has is that data set. And if you want to do AI, you're going to be doing AI on top of that data set. And
Right.
And there's a lot of there are a lot of companies in the AI space, but what is truly valuable are proprietary data sets. But if you're not keeping that data or collecting it, then you may be one of your most valuable assets maybe slipping through your fingers.
That's a really good word. Yeah. Anything else like that that you'd want to kind of, as we wrap up here, like that you'd want to just kind of at a high level or at a even more specific like that, say to the founder, the entrepreneur who's kind of anywhere along that journey?
I guess I would say just don't be afraid of it. I think it's important that you put those guardrails in place at the very beginning and you protect those, right? That contract, both the contract that you have with your customers as well as, for lack of a better term, with regulators, financial or other type of regulators. Somebody said to me one time, well, who do you fear more, the hacker or the auditor? And I thought about that and I thought, well, actually both of them, because the hacker can kill you quickly and the auditor can kill you slowly. So I'm actually afraid of both of them. But I think the point is put the right frameworks in place, but then with those guardrails in place and then get into the game. And I think data is key to supercharging the business. I think it's also key to this world that we're moving into with AI, and it will allow you to play in that space. And then the tool stack, the tech stack will change over time. The processes will evolve. The people, you want the right people with the right perspective, just be thoughtful about how you lay that out.
No, that's really good. No, I appreciate you taking the time to just share your wisdom and your experience in it. Even though the topic was on data, it's really apparent. Yeah, you have a whole ecosystem of expertise that allows you to not only understand what's going on with data, but the good stewardship of it, the application of it, how it relates to strategy and business and bringing value to people. So definitely appreciate you sharing that with our community.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point, right? That your data strategy needs to be holistic.
Yeah,
you can't just look at it as the bits and the bytes and what your data warehouse strategy is or your data lake.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Awesome.